Hello, and welcome back to Ranking of Kings Pragmatic Empathy. Last time we talked about episode 1 and did some general class introduction stuff. This week, I get to introduce you to yourself, kind of, because this week's episode is about Kage, who is, as I mentioned last time, sort of the audience surrogate. We'll get more into that a little bit later. So, episode 2, what is it? What is it about? Man, this is a messy. Whoever used this last was not taking care of it. Episode 2 of Ranking of Kings. What is it about? It is mostly about Kage's backstory, but it also goes a little bit into the conclusion of Daida and Boji's fight. But there are a lot of interesting observations, and there are a lot of important details along the way. This episode starts with Kage calling Boji too kind-hearted, and this is a phrase that he is not just shooting steam with. He's not just saying stuff based on some jaded worldview he doesn't deserve. He deserves to be jaded. And this episode is all about why he is and how that's affected him. See, Kage is part of the Shadow People. He has the least original. It's like if you named your son Hugh and your last name was like Man and you were a human. That's Kage. Kage is a shadow person named Shadow. Now, the Shadow People are especially adept assassins. They can slide under doors real easy. They can glide along walls very quickly. They can hold items, so they're very good at sneaking things in and out of places. They are quite adept at subterfuge. And thus, one of the kingdoms of this world decides that they need to die. They're too good at subterfuge. And thus, a genocide ensues, as they do. Pursued by what is perhaps the most hateable human ever drawn in history, Kage, and who we find out is Kage's mother, try to escape danger, but sacrificing herself, Kage's mother is able to find some safety for Kage along with the aid of some strangers. Now, the first thing that I really want to get into here is the saccharine nature of sadness and how some stories paint better and are understood better with emotion. See, as far as I can tell, there's basically two kinds of sadness that media addresses in general. We have your A24 sads and your Bleach sads. Your A24 sad is a more complex, nuanced approach to sadness. It's oftentimes addressing the process of grieving or what it is to be sad or why someone is sad or feeling sad for no reasons. It is evaluation of the emotions, and that's important and meaningful. But Ranking of Kings is Bleach sad. And I don't mean that as like shade. I mean that as a tremendous compliment. Bleach sadness is about painting in the pastiche of what sadness is. It is reaching into the divine realm and pulling out capital S sadness and using it as a color in your palette to paint with. And that is what Ranking of Kings does. Bleach does that too. I wouldn't have put Bleach if Bleach didn't do that, but I'm not going to go into Bleach at all. Probably ever. So if you're watching Ranking of Kings and like me, you're like, man, this sure is some, what's the opposite of saccharine? Like sadcrine? This sure is some sadcrine sadness. This is some unpleasant sadness that just seems to be happening for no reasons. And if you try and evaluate the sadness in Ranking of Kings like it's an A24 film, you might walk away with the wrong impression. Ranking of Kings does have very profound things to say about sadness, but it says them painting in a different way than an A24 film. An A24 film uses words and it uses ideas and logic and concepts and aesthetic in concert to create an appreciation and an understanding of what sadness in this respect is. Bleach sadness, Ranking of Kings sadness, is about forming and informing the feeling of sadness in various ways. So I guess what I'm trying to say is this. If you are approaching Ranking of Kings and it is throwing all these scenes at you that you're like, man, I am just not into all this stupid cry porn stuff, you might need to go back and try watching it with a different lens. Because that was very much my problem at first. I was like, man, his mom died because of a genocide that they didn't even mention in the first episode? That's not fair to Ranking of Kings. That's not fair to anything. We don't talk about genocide every day. Why would they? When you go into Ranking of Kings with a resistance to cry, then you are doing yourself a tremendous disservice because Ranking of Kings works best when it can hit you primally. What do I mean by that? So let's think of sadness as existing in two dimensions. It exists in our world as we understand it now, dubiously or not, and then it exists in a sort of perfect, different form above us in a supernal realm of some sort. Kant called this the ding and sitch. Plato called these the forms. Maybe Socrates. It doesn't matter. All that old Greek philosophy is just fan fiction anyway. The point I'm trying to get at is imagine that there is sort of a holy sadness, a divine true sadness. For the purpose of this, I'm just going to call that the big sad. Now, the big sad stretches out into our lives in a lot of different ways. A24 horror is about identifying what is this, or this, or this. What happens when you get to this part? What happens when you get to this part and then you go back and then you're coming back down again? What is this at that point? Bleach sadness doesn't care about any of this part. Bleach sadness only cares about the big sad. It cares about invoking, replicating, and painting with the concept of primal sadness. Watching a show that works with ideas like big divine sadness oftentimes means that characters have to be very, very sad, and the situations they find themselves in are often larger than life, kind of ridiculous, and maybe even a little unbelievable. Good. Lots of times our lives are unbelievable. I think some anime that people regard very highly as addressing topics adjacent to sadness address the big sad very well. Berserk is one great example, but I can't think of many better than Ranking of Kings. That's one of the reasons I really want to get into this. So, what I'm saying is, if the sadness in Ranking of Kings seems a little melodramatic, maybe over the top, try looking at it with a wider lens. Don't view it as a story being told concisely and for the purpose of having a concise Song of Ice and Fire-esque story. The reason that these melodramatic, over the top scenes are in the story and not something more believable is because broad, incredible strokes are being painted. This is a Francisco Goya, an impressionistic, heavy piece with inch-thick paint on it. This isn't a watercolor. You got to let yourself feel all the feelings in this show. You got to let it into your heart, and you got to feel what the characters feel. And if you can do that, if you can ride that wavelength, you'll be crying every episode, and you'll love it. You'll adore the series for it. So Kage gets some help from some strangers, but then he is alone and on his own again. He is a broken, desperate, starving child. Left on the streets, what does he have to do other than steal? He tries to steal some food. I think he actually tries to trade his little toy for some food. He has a toy that his mom gave him. It's not important. The point is that he wasn't trying to steal. He still retained his innocence. Is I guess the point of that scene. But he tries to get some food but doesn't have the common means of exchange. People don't appreciate it. They beat him up, throw him in an alley, and leave him for dead, where he is found by a waste of human skin who then uses him to rob and steal from others. But after that waste of human skin then wastes all of his money gambling and drinking, he sells Kage to that nation that was trying to genocide him for some reward money. Now, I don't know about you guys, but I grew up in drug culture. My parents big on drugs. So I've heard that particular story a bunch of times. It doesn't actually get to me that much, but it is the little moments of minutia within it that make it so texturally sad. There is a scene where Kage goes to this waste of flesh. He's drunk and he's passed out on his bed. His hand is hanging off of the bed, and Kage, just desperate for touch, for companionship, for kindness, goes to this drunken man's hand and is holding it, and I'm crying, weeping. There is a scene where this man gives Kage a single coin out of a gigantic treasure chest of gold coins and then says, "There you go, kid. You're cut." I'm very evil. I'm going to cut that part out. And Kage is like, what's this? A gift for me? I will treasure it forever. Thank you. After all this, though, after he gets betrayed by this man, Kage is listless. He doesn't know what to do. He escapes from the guards chasing him, and he goes back to the guy. He doesn't know what to do. He's stuck in an abusive relationship. The guy throws him out, and after that, he's still just wandering around trying to figure everything out. He's following this guy, this waste of flesh, who then goes to a bar, gets too drunk, gets into a brawl fight, and dies. It's anticlimactic. It should be anticlimactic. His story was destined to end in such a place. He made horrible choices at the expenses of others. We don't really know anything about his backstory. I'm sure it's very sad given the propensity of the show to make you feel bad for characters who have behaved in evil manners. Anyway, in the middle of all of this, there is one, I think, pretty important line. Kage flashes back to just before he was endangered by this genocide, and his mother is talking to him, and his mother says, "We do what we must to serve those that need us most." We do what we must to serve those that need us most. Excuse my terrible handwriting. On the surface, this might feel like it is a powerful or inspirational quote, but in reality, it is not. It is a quote that you might put on a throw pillow from Hobby Lobby. This is the human condition. If someone isn't doing this, they are different from the norm. People do what they must to serve those that need them the most. We see it again and again and again. Taken at its initial value, you could apply this to any of the world's atrocities and see the lens by which they justified their actions. Kage's mother saying that she was not afraid to kill because she did what she must to serve those that needed her the most is true, and it is human, and we can all relate to it. But is it ethical? The show doesn't get into this directly with the shadow people, but I think it is here by implication. If you live by this token, we do what we must to serve those that need us most. And if your answer to what you must do is murder, hey, guess what? Now someone else can say that about you and do the same. And that's arguably what happened. I'm sure there was much worse, terrible, unhelpable circumstances that led to this genocide. Actually, I don't. I think it might just be. No, actually, genocide is always bad. Don't ever try to justify genocide. The point that I'm trying to get to is a lot of other aspects of the show emphasize this idea that if you live by one creed and that creed leads you to doing dark things, someone else is perfectly ethical in using that same creed against you. We see this again and again in different characters, and it might be there by implication for Kage and the Shadow People, but he's supposed to kind of be our surrogate, so they couldn't give him too much. Oh, yeah, the surrogate thing. You might be asking, Kage's clearly he's got a backstory. How can he be our surrogate? Easy. His pain is irrelevant to the story. No one even knows that it happened other than that the Shadow People got wiped out a long time ago. They don't know about his personal suffering. I'd argue a lot of characters don't even care. By that same token, though, I guess, Kage doesn't care about their suffering too much either. You know who does care probably? Boji. Neither here nor there. But because his suffering is irrelevant, he can slot into any place in the story and have a backstory, have motivations, have character understanding, but still not be questioned on any particular plot, this or that. He's just sort of here by chance. He's magnetized onto the plot, but the plot's better for him, and he does save Boji a number of times. That's fine. But he is our surrogate. Before you ever started watching this show, you undoubtedly had some horrendously painful things occur in your life. If you didn't, I am deeply, deeply envious of this and hope that nothing in your life ever falls out from underneath you, leading to untold suffering. Kage's pain is irrelevant. Your pain is irrelevant, but your characters are informed by this pain. You can relate to Kage in this way. You can understand him when he's a little prickly. You can understand him when he's especially defensive of a good friend that he finally found after having a real bad friend. Kage, I think, is built to be a stealth, relatable character. He is, in many ways, his own established character, but his design and his backstory, and the fact that his backstory doesn't factor into the plot as rigidly as other characters, all indicate to me that he's there to sort of be our surrogate, to be our guide into this world, to look at this royal family and these characters and be able to ask, well, who's that? What can they do? Why should I care? Kage is mistreated to the point that he becomes incredibly jaded to all of humanity. People are cruel to him. When he does pay for food, they toss it on the ground and he has to eat it off of the ground till eventually he ends up in a rough and tumble lifestyle, sleeping outside and stealing clothes from children, which is where the show now picks up again, flash forwarding quickly to the fight between Boji and Daida. Now, Boji and Daida are still fighting. Boji is still avoiding him without effort, and Daida is getting pretty mad about it. But as Kage remarks, Boji's eyes are focused and insightful, and he is good at dodging things, although he cannot land a decisive and finishing blow. He's not trading blows at all. He dodges and he whaps and he dodges and he boops. This is eminently frustrating to Daida, who just wants to prove how dominant and powerful he is for reasons that will become apparent later. Boji's sword style becomes progressively less popular with those watching and those participating before Domus, the king's master of sword, steps in and tells Boji that this is not the swordsmanship of a king. You must exchange blows with your opponent, which to me hits with the same sort of energy that American revolutionaries were hitting the British with when the British were like, no, you must line up your troops and we will shoot volleys at one another in large squares. We didn't start winning the Revolutionary War until we stopped doing that, by the way. So, being reprimanded by people he loves and respects, Boji caves and starts trying to fight Daida style and predictably gets whomped because he is not very strong. Daida actually intended with this attack to make Boji unable to lift a sword ever again. I think he specifically targets his hand in one of the assaults. It eventually gets so brutal that Kage starts to interfere, but another character named Apis, the king's master of spear, and I think the second strongest of the big four, maybe? We'll get into that later. But he interferes. He throws a spear between them, and he looks real angrily at Domus. Daida, of course, is too narcissistic to admit any fault. He says that he tried to cripple Boji. He goes upstairs. He says what's up to his evil magic mirror. We cut over to Boji, who is beat up in bed. People are looking at him. Things are looking real sad and pathetic. Domus says some stuff, and Kage remarks, Domus? I know his type. You can't trust guys like Domus. That's equal parts true and false. Domus is a great character, but don't trust him. Everybody else leaves the room, leaving Boji and Kage alone together. They didn't do this on purpose. They don't like Kage. They don't know he's there, but he's a sneaky shadow man, and he's our surrogate, so he needs to be around Boji as much as physically possible. They talk for a little bit. Boji tries to lift a sword that is too heavy for him, and then Kage, moved by Boji's determinism and general friendly demeanor, swears fealty to Boji, says that they're ride or die for life. The real emotional core of this episode really exists in that ride or die statement from Kage. We saw in the first episode what Boji struggled with. We see in this episode what Kage struggled with. And now we see how they are together. And for the remainder of the series and perhaps time and space, they shall remain. In its heart of hearts, Ranking of Kings is a coming of age story, but not shut off terribly far from that. It is, in fact, a buddy cop anime. Just in this case, the cops are knights, and the main two characters aren't officially members of the Force yet. Well, thank you for joining me today. Your homework is to summarize your favorite fairy tale into one paragraph. Have that to me by the next time we meet. And of course, watch episode 3 of Ranking of Kings so that we can go over that one next time. Have a great day, everybody.